for us. Okay, so I have my vice clamp set up, and I'm going to set up my mandrel with my sizes facing up, and I am going to go for a size 9 because I want to wear this on like my thumb or something. And when I do a rolling ring, it needs a little bit of an upsize so it can move over itself. So you go up 1.5 sizes. So if my normal ring size for this finger is a 9, I'm actually going to cut these all at 10.5. And rather than me stretching it out, you could totally do that. I have all the ring charts in the measuring tools drawer, and you could do it flat if you prefer. But what I find that's faster is to just do it on the mandrel. So if I'm doing these at 10.5, I'm going to snip off this twisted part because I want to keep it flat. Let me see. Okay, close the door. Thanks. So I'm going to line this up at 10.5, and I'm going to hit the end of it and kind of feed it through. The nice thing with the wire is it's pretty easy. And if you all are working with the copper or the brass, I'm not as worried about waste as with the silver. So you don't have to work off the spool like me because otherwise we'll all be waiting in line for a while. So you can totally just cut off a long enough chunk and work with that so we're not all waiting. And then I have the end of mine here. I'm squeezing it tight so I kind of see where they butt up against each other. And then I'm just going to do a Sharpie line where I want to cut the other one so they stay even. And when I cut with these, the side that says flush cut is going to give me a flat end, whereas this side that's dimpled in creates kind of a point on the end of my wire. So what I want to do is I want to cut with the flat side facing the rest of my ring, because then if I know my camera is only so-so, if I zoom in on this, they're truly flat where they're coming together. Whereas the other side that I just cut, I don't know if you'll be able to see on my camera, has a bit of a point in the middle. It's kind of like poking out here. I want these to be flat so they have a better connection for when I solder them. So I'm going to do that 3 times. So I'm going to make them all size 10.5. So whatever your up size is, I'm going to trim this end off since I just cut it and it was pokey. I'm going to face it away so I don't cut it and fling it at Charlotte. There we go. And then same thing. So hit this guy. Once you get that end curled, you can kind of do the rest by hand with the wire. The copper's a little bit chunkier, so you may need to hammer it the whole time. And then same process, make sure I'm pinching it tight as I'm marking this. And then slide this off, chop it. If they're not all perfectly even, it's not the end of the world. Cut it with my flush side of my pliers because I want those guys parallel. Because the nice thing with these is since they are overlapping, you've got a little bit of wiggle room with the sizes being slightly varied. You just want to make sure that they're not like one's a size 8, one's a size 6, one's a size 10. Like you got to keep them close enough. Okay, and then this one. And if they're a little wonky looking, as long as your wire is not twisting, like make sure your flat side of your wire is still facing down against the mandrel, then you're good. All right, and like I said, you could do, like the default is 3, you could do any odd number of these. So you could do 5, you could go crazy and do 7, it'd be really chunky. I've never seen someone do that many, so I'd be curious. And then put this guy back, make sure you have the wire go through the spool, and that way it's not gonna all unravel. And then now for interlocking these, I want to close them up. Move this guy out of the way. I'm going to close them up, so I'm going to go over under a few times just to make sure I have that tension. And I'm going to be nitpicky with my side view that they look in line, because these are going to solder pretty easily. So if I have it like that, it will solder, but it's going to look weird. So, and it won't roll if it's super bumpy. So check the views that all the edges look like they're even. I'm going to move this guy out of the way since I'm done with him. And then you're going to close up your first one. I would leave them all open until you get to this point, because some people, including myself, forget and will close them and then realize they have to interlock and have to open them back up. So then second one, I'm going to interlock through my first one. I'm going to close him up. bring that guy together. Make sure they look parallel. Make sure everything looks even. Shape of my ring itself doesn't matter too much as long as my connection looks flush. And then my last one is going to go through both of those rings. And then this one, same thing. Back and forth. Bring that together. Check that one. I'm just going to bend this guy down so they've got a nice flat connection because they look a little gapped. Okay, and then I've got these all interlocking now. And when I solder them, I'm going to set up and solder on here too. See if I can get enough of a view that this makes sense. When I solder them, normally when I have you all solder, I have you wash things first. You'll probably want to do that just for better rates of success. I have found that the wire heats up so fast that it's actually relatively easy, and you can skip that step sometimes if you need, but you absolutely want to make sure you flux. So since this heats up so fast, I'm going to use our liquid flux, the stuff that looks like Mountain Dew, and I'm just going to do drops definitely on my connection points. If I want, I could do it everywhere, but I only really need it on my connection points. And I have all of my connection points facing away from each other because when I melt that solder, if it touches another ring to, like one ring to another, they'll solder together. We can take them apart, but it's just more work for you. And then I forgot my solder. I always forget something. I knew I'd forget one thing over here. So I'm going to show you how to do what's called pig soldering. And this, I think, is the simplest way to go about it. It is a little bit more of a delicate touch, but the nice thing is you have more control with it. Okay, I think I got everything. Okay, so I sorted, if you didn't have me last semester, I sorted our solder into jars with the labels. And when you guys are soldering, you can use multiple levels, but you always want to start with the harder level of solder. That way when you go back in, it's not going to melt as fast, and you can use a lower level. So easy is the fastest to melt. I'm just going to do that because I feel like I can do this all in one go. And I'm going to cut the smallest little piece of easy and put my finger over this little dimple so it doesn't fly away and like hit Brooklyn or Ava. And then I've got a tray on the side to catch these. And just in my own experience, I'm going to cut an extra because who knows if I'm going to drop it. And then if you all are working, since we're going to have so many of people in here working with the solder station, if you have extra solder in your tray when you're done, if you know what it is, return it to that jar, because whenever I come up and you don't know what it is, it's not super useful because you don't know how fast it'll melt, and then you end up wasting solder. And then my pick just looks like a needle tool, and I'm going to put flux on that too. Flux is just really crucial because if you forget that, nothing's going to want to stick. Everything's going to be too grimy, and flux kind of keeps your surface clean enough for things to want to connect. But people wanting to connect is pretty cute too. Okay, let me move some of my stuff out of the way that I don't need anymore. Thank you. And then I'm going to not be able to put this heat on my plastic tray. Hopefully that's for obvious reasons. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my solder that I just cut onto this tray. I know it's really hard to see because it's so small. Let me move my piece in camera for you. I also have a black piece of charcoal when I pick solder. I like to use that sometimes because then I can see it a little bit better. But what I'm going to do is on this torch, I actually have kind of an intense torch right now. Like we can use our smaller ones for this. I'm going to put it on lowest heat, and then I'm going to have my pick behind my solder, heat my pick, and then when the pick heats up, my solder's going to want to cling to the hot thing. So it'll jump onto my pick. Then I place my pick on my ring, heat my ring, and it jumps over to the ring because then that's hot. So I'm going to turn this boy on. There we go. Has to wake up after break. Hit my pick. You'll see my flux kind of get all crusty and then get clear and liquidy. And then sometimes I have to cool off, like take it off for a second, and then I can pick up my solder. And I don't know if you guys can see that tiny little silver bead that's on there, but I've got a tiny little silver bead of solder on there. And then I'm going to rest this right on my connection, and I can rotate this and heat just that ring. So then my solder moved over. Heat just that ring. And then it melted down, and I'm good. And then, lost 2 pieces. See, this is why I like my pick behind it, because otherwise it blows away. Take my heat off so I can scoop that guy up. Move it to my other one. Heat just my ring. The reason I want to just heat that one is if I heat my other ones, they might get kind of dirty, and then they might have to be cleaned before I can actually solder them. And this one, it looks like my solder went to one side, so I'm going to try to heat that ring and scoop it over, but I may need to clean that and then come back to it. And then my other one fell into the rocks, but I think I've got another piece in here I can work with. And you don't even have to have your solder piece in this rock bin. We can do it in the soldering booth on just the ceramic shelf that we have there. It's all old flux on the board. Okay. And then this guy's my last one. That one. See if I can drop him off. I think I lost him. Can't tell if he's in there. Yeah. Okay, cool. So I got that one. So now I'm gonna quench it, throw it in the water. It might be a little sticky from my flux. And then we'll check to see if all of this connected. Sorry if it's smelly. I know we normally do it in the hood. And you can see that tiny piece of solder flowed so much. So tiny little bits are enough. The benefit of silver, other than it just being something that doesn't tarnish, is it's going to blend in. So it's a little more forgiving with the solder flowing. This one's good. And that one's good. So then we would clean it, and before you clean it, what I usually like to do is make sure that those solder connections feel nice and strong and rounded out. And so I'm going to put the mandrel back in place. I'm sure I'm screwing this in the right way. No, I'm going the wrong way. And some of our mandrels have a dent in them, which are specifically for moments like this. And I forgot to grab that one. I'll show you how that works, because that's going to be nice when you're doing the rolling ring. The mandrels that I have that are like lighter weight, I wouldn't hammer on just because they might dent, or one's plastic. Like, it's just not going to hold up if you try to hammer it. But this guy is great for this moment because he's got a little channel in it. And the reason that that's there is when I hook this up, I can slide my extra rings when I put this on the mandrel into that channel, and that way everything else stays round. And then I can just hammer and round this out again if they're a little wonky in their shape, and check that I've got it to the shape that I want. And then do all the other guys. And once I have this rounded, your next step would be to pickle it. It won't really roll when it's crusty. So when you have it rounded out and it's cleaned off, then it's gonna roll really nicely. But when you are working with brass, if you're working with copper, we can just put it in the regular pickle. Same thing with silver. But if we are working with brass, it gets kind of pink. Like you can see mine looks a little more pinkish now. Next to the pickle, we have a jar that says super pickle, and that's gonna be stronger. And what you can do is you can put your brass rings, if you work with brass like I did, into the super pickle, and in like 10 minutes, it'll turn it back to that yellow gold for you. Whereas if it stays in the regular pickle, it's gonna stay kind of pink. So if you don't like that coloration on it, we can do the super pickle, but the super pickle only lasts for about a day. So once we get into that more, I'll show you guys how to make it. And I'll throw this guy in there today, and I can show you what it looks like after, and then it's tumbled and it's done. So the process itself, man, this guy, the process itself is not too bad.